Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok divrei Torah. And we are in the last part of Lech Lecha, of this Parsha for this coming week, about Abraham. And we are reading about the Brit Milah, the covenant of circumcision. And I have since this is like the third time, our third lesson on this particular topic, I will not repeat everything that I said before as to its significance. So, but here we go. Here we go. So he has just been commanded that he and his offspring are to perform this commandment of circumcision for all future generations. And it is a sign of a covenant. And in the previous sections, God has told Abram what that covenant is. Part of it involves the land of Israel. So, but now we have the downside of it. Va'arel zachar, right? There is no English word for arel. Arel is an uncircumcised person. So in Hebrew, there is an actual word to describe someone who is uncircumcised. The word orla, right, as you can see, it's related to this word. The word orla means foreskin. An arel is someone who still has a foreskin. Zachar of a male, an uncircumcised male. Asher lo yimo, who will not circumcise a besar orlato, there's the word, who does not circumcise the flesh of his foreskin. What's the consequence? V'nichreta hanefesh hahi me'ameha. That soul will be karated. I didn't translate the word. Basically, it means cut off. That soul will be cut off from her people. That is a divine consequence. And Rashi will discuss the two theories that are mentioned in the Talmud as to what exactly it involves. We'll get to it in a moment. You can see it is a huge consequence. Et briti hefire. The reason for it is he has nullified my covenant. So let's take a look at Rashi here. Let's see here. Arel Zachar. So the fact that it says a male who is uncircumcised, sadly, we are aware that there are certain cultures that perform female circumcision. It sounds awful. I think it is. We do not obviously practice it, but here it says explicitly, in case there's any question as to who, when God says to Abraham, he is to circumcise his offspring, we are talking about males. Kan limed, here scripture teaches, shahamila be'oto makom, so it also teaches that the circumcision is, oto makom is a euphemism. It means, it means in that place, shahu nikar ben zachar ben keva, where he is recognized whether he's male or female. In other words, the penis. And very often, when it's referring to that, lim, in Hebrew, they'll use a euphemism, otomakom, that place. And it's an abbreviation of this entire phrase that Rashi is using. This is from Bereshit Rabbah. So we know that the circumcision is that of the male member. Asher lo yimor. So such a person who does not circumcise. Mi sheyagia lichlal onshin. So again, we're now going into a little bit of a halachic analysis. And because this is a mitzvah, right? This is a divine commandment. We get into legal issues that you might call legalities, in the sense that, and by legal here, I mean a careful analysis of all the various elements that are pertaining to this situation. And one is the person of legal age? That's what we just read, right? We know that the consequences are profound, but part of the understanding, and Rashi is saying to it, once he reaches to the age of onshin, where he bears responsibility. Basically, in English, we translate the age of responsibility. An onish actually is a punishment. So in Hebrew, the idea is that you've reached the age where you may be punished. Punished because you're responsible. So in other words, in English, we say the age of responsibility. By the way, there is a blessing, a bracha. Many people know this already, that a father says to a son at his bar mitzvah, what's the bracha? So Baruch atah, etc., right? And basically what he says is, who has absolved me of the punishment due to this one. And that is because up to the age of bar mitzvah, the parent is responsible, the father is responsible for any sins committed by his child. And after bar mitzvah, that is what it means exactly by bar mitzvah. It means the age of responsibility. It doesn't mean party time. Okay. So it's sort of, in a way, I think, forgive me, editorializing, a little bit sad that we kind of missed the point. But anyway, as some wit said, somewhat obviously, these days there's more bar than mitzvah. Anyway, sorry. My apologies. V'nichrita, right. So once this child has reached the age of responsibility, v'nichrita, at that point, the punishment can be that he will be cut off. Aval aviv, however, his father eino anush alav karet, but his father is no longer, right, or maybe in period, his father is not punished for him with the punishment of karet. Okay, and I think this is the point that Rashi's making, that up until this point, is someone going to be responsible, since the father is responsible for the child if he does not perform mitzvot? Would he therefore be, this is, of course, a legal question, right? Would he be subject to karet? And Rashi is telling us no. Aval over ba'aseh, he will have transgressed a positive commandment, which doesn't carry it with it a punishment of karet. But again, the idea that as human beings created by our divine creator, we are responsible for our lives and how we do this. So, nichrita hanefesh, so here we go. What does this mean? That soul will be cut off. Olech ariri, he will either die childless. Ariri is a word that means childless. Umet kodem zmano, it says, and he dies young. Okay. This is found in Masechet Shabbat, the Tractate Shabbat on page 104. This is pretty rough stuff. Okay, it's very rough stuff. I want to underscore, we should not argue negative from the negative side, meaning saying that if someone dies childless, that we would say that they had karet. If someone dies young, likewise that this is karet. I don't think that's for us to make those judgments. I think that is abuse of religion and abuse of knowledge. I think the idea is to try and say, just to underscore, this is not a small thing. And there are many cases, I think, where as human beings, we might think a particular mitzvah or law is somewhat insignificant. And so the Torah purposely goes out of its way to express in various ways how it is significant. And one of those ways would be to say that the punishment is quite severe. And that's what we should understand by this. I believe. I have another theory. That goes beyond this, right? And that is to say, when it says the soul is cut off, is to say that there is something called immortality, and karet means one loses that opportunity for immortality. Now, losing that opportunity isn't actually, even though there's actually a tractate called Kritot that I think describes all the cases in the Torah where the punishment for the violation of a mitzvah is karet. By the way, it's unusual for the punishment of karet for a positive mitzvah, right? The positive mitzvah is to perform circumcision. And if one doesn't perform that positive commandment, one faces this consequence. It's very unusual, but I do believe that for the most part, we have opportunities to gain immortality, and we also have opportunities to lose that opportunity. And that's, I believe, it's a theory, it's a thought, just from the language, etc., that's what it means. Yes, Judith.
And what about not circumcising a child for health reasons?
That's okay. So, it's a wonderful question. And there is this chapter in Masechet Shabbat, which discusses those sorts of issues, right? Because the issue of circumcision, if the 8th day, which is when the circumcision has to take place, according to the Torah, happens to fall on Shabbat, what do? Because you're not supposed to do that kind of thing on Shabbat, and you're not supposed to violate Shabbat. And by the way, the punishment, this is probably you don't want to hear this, but the punishment for intentional violation of Shabbat is, guess what? Karet. Okay. At any rate, so the question is, what do? And the answer is, under normal circumstances, you quote violate Shabbat because the positive mitzvah of performing the circumcision overrides the negative of violating the Shabbat. So you do. But there's a but. So you asked a very good question. If the child is a hemophiliac, and the issue is how do you know, etc., and what happens if children like some babies die, God forbid, from this? Do you and you have another male child, and there's that possibility. So you don't perform milah. You don't do circumcision if a child's health is involved. So what do? Suppose the child isn't strong enough to go through circumcision at the 8th day. The child just isn't sufficiently viable. You postpone it to the earliest opportunity. So what happens if the earliest opportunity happens to be on Shabbat? And the answer is you don't do it on Shabbat. You would observe Shabbat and do it on the day after, at the first opportunity. The other thing is that you do not perform circumcision before 8 days. That's very important. But yes, there's no question that in the oral law, so this is going back over 2 millennia, they discuss these practical applications. And I'll take a moment to say that we have the written law, which we just read in this particular thing. The written law is ideal. It's in heaven. But what about reality? What about the application of that ideal? And to me, this is the genius of Judaism and the oral law, the concept of oral law. Because
if I can interject for a moment.
Yes, go on.
My son Dan
Yes.
Was born on January the 4th.
Yes.
And we had his bris scheduled in Canton from a mohel coming down from Cleveland. And there was a snowstorm, which made road travel hazardous. And the mohel's wife basically refused to allow him to travel down, which was a wise decision. And she cited something in the oral law that said basically it should be postponed, which we did for a period of a few days or a week. So it comes up in real life.
Which is my point.
Yes.
Because one can look at religion as being idealism, or you can make every effort to apply in reality. So this is what is bringing the 10 Commandments down Mount Sinai, down to the ground. And it means, it also implies that we are taking this seriously. Yes, Judith.
So what about a family that decides that circumcision of a male is as bad as circumcision of a female, and and refuses to vaccinate their children.
Right.
Though that, of course, is not a commandment. Does that mean that when the kid is 13, he is responsible for getting himself circumcised? What about circumcision in the hospital on day 2? Though I don't think they keep kids in hospital that long anymore.
Right. Right. So you're asking some different questions, and the answer is this is the point that Rashi's making right now, is if the father did not take the responsibility of fulfilling this commandment, the commandment falls on the child. But look, also we have to understand that turning 13 many, many centuries ago, maybe not that many centuries ago, already, I'm pretty sure that my great-great-grandmother probably was married at the age of 12. Okay. The whole notion of childhood and child development is a relatively recent one. I'm not opposed to it. I just want to throw that in. But regardless, there are cultures, I'm sure, where once you hit the age of 13 plus, you're considered responsible. So if I were to apply it, I would say once one reaches the age of responsibility, whether it's 18 or 21, I mean, I would have, as a conservative rabbi, I would try to adjust to the realities of the situation. But yes, we are saying that you are therefore responsible. The child is the one. And of course, at this point, what we're saying is the adult. Rashi is saying that when one reaches adulthood, one is responsible for that. And families who have these various opinions clearly are, they have to work it out. I've been thinking about this quite seriously, that when we say Adonai Eloheinu, when we use that term Eloheinu is our God, we are basically saying that we are loyal to the Torah as an expression of divine commandment, and we are committed to trying to practice that as well as we can. And when we say Shema Yisrael, we are saying to Jacob, our patriarch Jacob, that just as he was committed to that, and when we say Adonai Echad, we're saying we believe in the same approach that he did. And when we say Adonai Eloheinu, we're actually saying something profound. With that Eloheinu, that Elohim part of it, is the part of commitment to the mitzvot, commitment to the practice of divine command. So if we start, second guessing divine command without any sort of real serious investigation into this, because clearly there are circumstances, this is what you're raising, that when we come into the world below Mount Sinai, we have to deal with circumstances. And you brought up, and me brought up circumstances where you're trying to do this the best you can, but reality is hitting. And that's the greatness of it, is that we take it seriously, that there are times when we're not going to be able to do it in its most perfect articulation, but the desire to do it, nevertheless, is clearly there, and we want to do it. And when we decide, oh, it's just wrong or it's out of date or whatever, I mean, we need to be very careful about those sorts of decisions. I'm not saying they may not be applicable. I can tell you that the statement, for example, about levirate marriages, right? Essentially, even in Talmudic times, they were not really in favor of it. And it's a levirate marriage, of course, is where a surviving brother marries his deceased brother's wife because she has no children. That's something that from a long time ago, there was concern about it because it happens to be marrying your brother's wife, okay, is considered a type of incest, and it's forbidden. And it's only in this circumstance, it's actually an example of oral Torah in the written Torah, which is saying circumstances change the situation. And I think it's an amazing process. There's so much to this in terms of answering the question, why was I born? And saying, well, the reason I was born was in order to try to be a conduit of the divine into this world. And the way I become that conduit is by reading the Torah, studying it, and trying to apply it. Yes, Judith. Judith, do you need to unmute? Okay.
Yes, I do. Sorry.
Okay.
Think of how many people who do not feel that commandments means incumbent upon me,
Right.
commandments as values
I know.
with which I am informed. Um,
Yeah,
you know, that's for many people their Jewish identity.
I know. I'm going to stop the share. Let me just do that. Okay. Um, I'm very aware of it. I'm very aware of it. And look, essentially we say ki le'olam chasto, for his kindness endures forever. God understands what motivates people. And you could say that in some ways, the very fact that human beings are responsible, are held responsible, is a great honor and privilege. Okay, so what exactly the final consequences of the situation you're talking about will be? I can only trust that God understands us in ways that we don't even understand ourselves. So many times it's out of ignorance. It's because people just are not knowledgeable. Ignorance on the law is not an excuse. However, there are extenuating circumstances, and I think there may well be people who ignore, who have the attitude that you have, and yet, in fact, are very righteous people. And I think that, you know, how kind one is to one's neighbors, how selfish one is, etc. I mean, there's all those kinds of consequences. And I think, you know, I'm going to believe that it's all dependent on the kind of life you've lived and what kind of background you had. What you learned from your parents, the influence they had on your life. I mean, we have various influences over which we have little control. So I would hope that despite the fact that I feel that in some ways the situation is tragic, you know, um, the person I have to obviously answer for is myself and the degree to which I don't perform commandments or the degree to which I don't, because there's also degrees to which one can perform these things, and whether I'm living up to my potential, my full potential. That's the question I have to ask myself. And to what extent I worry about all the people you're mentioning, Judith, has to be in a way that in the limited capacity that I have, to do the best I can to be that conduit, not to judge others.
Well, I know for myself, for example, I consider myself Zocheret Shabbat and not Shomeret Shabbat.
Understood.
Um, some things I'm a pick and choose Jew, and it means a lot to me, but I don't know how I understand commanded. Um, it it certainly think is commanded as a value, as an aim, as this is the way I want to walk. Nobody does that perfectly.
Right.
And nobody and we often have choices like with circumcision on Shabbat, where you have to choose between certain things. And, I don't know, most people aren't going to go ask for a rabbinic ruling on various decisions.
I might say, thank God.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yes, go on, please. I'm sorry.
that's really it. I don't, you know, what happens when the kid was circumcised in a hospital at 2 days? Is that kid a circumcised? Does he
Okay,
have to
so
do
we have a
Hakapot
solution for
Gambri?
that. There's a solution. There is So, for example, there are times when children are, in fact, where someone converts and they have a child, right? They have a very young child, and but even 2, 3, maybe a little older, right? But still a minor, and they have a minor child, and they're converting to Judaism. And the child was circumcised in the hospital at 2 days, just for example. We actually have a ceremony called Tipat Dam, which means a droplet of blood. And what you do is we're on the shaft, if you don't mind my being, and this is being recorded, so I hope it's okay, I'm being explicit, that where the penis is not very sensitive along the shaft, okay, that you take, like, for example, the kind of what you use, say, to check to the pinprick, right? And you
It's a
just scratch.
lancet. A
Yeah, it's a
lancet.
very tiny,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Very tiny blade. And you just scratch there, and you take a cloth like a gauze, and you touch the spot, and you look for the slightest bit of pink. And you make a bracha before you do this, and it's relatively painless, and that is considered a circumcision. So again, you have to understand what you're talking about is a part of life. It is life. I have actually done it once in my life. I've actually had to do it on an adult. It was a very interesting experience, I can tell you. I was I was in a sense, circumstances, whatever. I was basically I had to do it because you know, it would have been most unfortunate. Not going to take the time now on a recording to explain all the circumstances, but I actually wound up doing it. And it was a very humbling experience. And I know the person who turned out to be a lawyer, and my wife was very worried. Okay. Um, but he was very appreciative, and I felt a certain bond with the person on whom I performed this. I knew it meant a lot to him because it brought him into the covenant. So anyway, yeah, there's a way to deal with it, Judith. Great question. So with this, I'm going to stop the recording before I get into more trouble. Okay. Thank you all for watching.